yes. We've got 51 responses, and these patterns are holding true thus far. Pastoral ministry experience, long tenure with the TAP produces steady and continuous growth. Long tenure with an in-TAP, non-turnaround pastor, results at best in a plateau and in most cases steady decline. The age of the pastor isn't a major factor in a turnaround. Barna says 45 years old or younger. We found out, we differed with Barna. Not that he's a bad man, but we needed something to compare to. And he's made that statement on here. He said 45 or younger. We found that a pastor can lead a church in a turnaround as late as his early 50s, possibly later. We had 3 were older than 45. They were 50, 51, and 52. So our research was different from Barna on that. TAPs are capable of leading multiple churches in a turnaround, more than one just church. Barna says only one turnaround in a lifetime is what he found. In our group, 7 pastors led 3 churches in turnarounds in their lifetime, and 2 pastors led 2 churches in turnarounds. See, we got all the statistical stuff out there. Now, the results of TAP scores on the disc. TAP scores either an ID or a DI or some combination of either. And by that I mean one or the other. The S or the C will work in, but there needs to be a D or an I in there somewhere, and then it can be one of the others. And by the way, you don't have to be a turnaround person to do consulting. But I think being aware of this means we're going to start working with the leaders a little bit more on this and having maybe some heart-to-heart talks, which is no fun. And then on the MBTI, the TAP scores were, the primary score on most of them was an ESFJ. ESFJ, if you know Myers-Briggs. Now, when I present this material, I go over Myers-Briggs so people understand that tool. I explain the tool and what those letters mean. I take time to do that. In most cases, they're extroverts. We thought they would be intuitives, but they were S's, sensing people. They were feelers, and they were the J's, or the judgmental type people. And that's not meant judgmental in a bad sense. And then we had 25 items on a leadership audit that are characteristics of TAPs, not in TAPs. We had 25 characteristics, and so that's the tool that we give. And we can take that tool and we can see where non-TAPs need to do the work because they will have marked, I'm weak in these areas. And so what we need to do now is come up with a curriculum that will help them to they won't be like a non-TAP. I'm sorry, they won't be like a TAP, but at least they can make progress. Because leadership can be learned. Skills can be learned. Temperament, I don't know.
Have you done any comparison with this TAP profile with a church planter profile?
Yeah, actually church planting is ahead. Church planting is ahead. And for a while there in church planting, we'd have a guy come along and say, I think God wants me to plant a church. So maybe give them $30,000 and maybe a few people, and a year later we'd find it just hadn't worked. And so that's when we began to realize, we began to look at guys with whom it had worked, and we saw similar characteristics. And now you have these assessment centers, as many of you know, where you go, and based on your assessment is whether or not they'll support you and get behind you. And that's smart, because some people are not church planters. And church planters have distinct characteristics on the Myers-Briggs and other, they're entrepreneurial.
What I'm wondering is what's the overlap between a solid planter profile and a solid TAP profile?
Well, we've not done all the characteristics on the planters, but again, the planter is entrepreneurial. They want to start something new. They want to collect people that come to them. They're already there, so people are joining them rather than they having to join another group. Whereas the turnaround people, they're coming into an existing group. It's a whole different dimension. They're not necessarily in control. They are joining that group. It may take a while to build trust. They have to understand that. They need to understand change and those kinds of things.